Hi class, this is our next lab. We're going to set up a Dhcp server. Now for this lab, I've already started the lab up. I made sure my domain controller was running. I also turned on my Dhcp server and signed in. I'm going to click yes to loosen up our firewall. So what we're doing today is we're going to create a Dhcp server and a Wds server. The Wds server is going to be used to do installations over the network. Normally in a corporate environment, we don't do installations off the DVD. It would be too time consuming. So what we do is we set up a server called a Wds server, and we're going to boot the client to the network. It'll grab the files that it needs, boots up, and starts the installation. We're going to even automate it using a philosophy of something called light touch, where it requires minimal involvement on our part to install an operating system. So the first thing we're going to do on this server is set up the IP addresses. Also, I want to point out that on D2L, I created another copy of the lab using the IP scheme that's right for ACE-IT. And right here is that network. So instead of using the 172.16 address, we're going to be using the 10.0.0.0/24 address for our network. So I'm going to go back to my server. So for this one, we need to assign an IP address of 10.0.0.4. I'll go back to my server, click on Ethernet, go into Properties, IPv4, 10.0.0.4, 255.255.255. The gateway, which you can't see on the diagram, which is part of ACE-IT, is 10.0.0.1. And our DNS server is going to be 10.0.0.2. The next thing we're going to do is rename our computer. I'm just going to stick with the names from the network diagram, so I'm going to call this WDS-DHCP, all in lowercase. And I'm going to join it to the domain, which we created in the last video, contoso.com. Sorry, I hit dot instead of hyphen. I'm going to supply my domain admin credentials to join the domain using our standard password. I'm going to sign back in. But this time I want to sign in as other users so I can sign in as my domain admin. Okay, I rebooted my machine. I signed in as a domain admin. Just to make sure you're signed in as a domain admin, open up PowerShell. I'm going to fix the font so you can see it. Then type the command, who am I? And I can see I'm signed in as a domain admin. Type exit to exit the PowerShell. So the next thing we need to do is install the software. So I'm going to click on Manage, Add Roles and Features. I'm going to go all the way down to the server role part. I'm going to choose DHCP server, because without the DHCP server, the WDS server won't work. When the DHCP server passes the client out an IP address, it's also going to pass out information about the deployment server, the actual name of the deployment server, and the file it needs to download from the deployment server to boot to. So I'm going to choose the deployment server as well. I'm also going to install the tools to manage both services. So I'm installing the DHCP server and the tools to manage the DHCP server, the Windows deployment service, and the tools to manage Windows deployment service. So I'm going to click Next. I'm just going to keep going, making no other changes other than to restart if necessary. Click Next. So basically, the WDS server is something called a Pixie server, PXE-server, or Pixie boot is what we sometimes refer to it as. It's basically when you boot up your computer, it has no OS on it. It'll connect to a network server, download a file, load that file into a RAM disk, then boot to that RAM disk. A WDS server is really nothing more than a TFTP server, a DHCP server, a file server like SMB file server, and a TFTP server. I think I already said that. So that's all our WDS server is. While this is installing, I'm going to press pause. Okay, it's installed, so I'm going to complete the DHCP configuration. I'm going to click Next. So it's going to do two things. It's going to create a group, two groups, a DHCP admins group, and if you're a member of that group, you can make changes to the DHCP server. A DHCP users group, if you're a member of that group, you can see the settings for the DHCP server. DHCP users group has nothing to do whether you can get an IP or not. Just it allows you to see the DHCP settings. It's also going to authorize this server to pass out IP addresses. Microsoft has this built-in self-defense mechanism that it's going to prevent DHCP servers from passing out IP addresses unless the admin gives a permission to. So in case someone brings in a rogue DHCP server in your network, you can prevent that from messing up your network. Because that could be a denial of service attack by having all your clients get bad IPs, and at that point no one can sign in. So it's important that you do this commit, otherwise your DHCP server won't function. So I'm going to click Close, Close. Now I'm ready to configure the DHCP server. So I'm going to go to Tools, DHCP. I'm not going to go too deeply in DHCP because this is in the next class, but you need to have it set up for this class. So I'm going to expand my DHCP server. I'm going to highlight IPv4. Now the purpose of a DHCP server is to pass out all the IP settings on your network. So I'm going to right click IPv4 and create a new scope. Think of a scope as like a subnet. So I'm going to click Next. And the name of the scope will be private, and I like to put in the description the subnet that I'm dealing with. In this case, it's the one being assigned to us from ACE-IT Lab, 10.0.0.4/24. Normally, this is a class A address, but it's been subnetted to create a bunch of little networks. So I'm going to click Next. The first usable IP in this subnet is 0.1, and the last IP in this subnet is 0.254. And I'm going to change the subnet mask to be 24 bits. 24 bits. I don't know why it keeps doing that. 24 bits. I could just type 255, 255, 255 here. Click Next. Now, in this range of IPs, these are the IPs we can actually pass out to clients, but some of them are being used. So I want to exclude them from being passed out. The scope will be aware that the IPs exist, but it won't pass them out. So I'm going to go back to my map. So in our map, I'm going to be using 1 for the router through 12. Those are the IPs I'm going to be using on my servers. I don't want to pass them out to clients. So I'm going to exclude those IP addresses. I'm back on my server. Now, if you don't click Add, it won't accept it. You have to add it. It has to be down here in the lower section before you click Next. How long we're going to allow that client to use that IP address? If you're a very stable network, you might want to increase this, but right now the default is 8 days. So this client will have this address for 8 days, but in actuality, it's going to renew it in 4 days. It's called half-life. It's going to try to contact the DHCP server and renew the lease in 4 days. If it doesn't talk to the DHCP server, it's going to try to contact the DHCP server in 2 days. If it's still not up, 1 day, then 12 hours, then 6 hours, then 3 hours, and so on. And at the very end, if it doesn't talk to the DHCP server, it will release the IP address and assign itself an APIPA address. That'll be an address that starts with 169.254. Sorry. Now it's asking if I want to configure additional options. When I pass out an IP address in subnet mask, there's other things I might want to pass out. The name of my domain, the DNS server, any gateways I might have for a network. So I'm going to configure those options now. So our gateway is 10.0.0.1 that's set up for us by ACE-IT Lab. We don't have control over that box. Click Next. Now, basically, I'm going to open up a PowerShell. I'm going to run ipconfig/all. And I can see that the domain name is here and the DNS server is here. So this utility just looked at its current IP settings to pull this information. If it's correct, and it is, just click Next. WinServer is an old form of name resolution before Windows used DNS. We don't use it anymore, but it's here for backwards compatibility. And do we want to make this scope pass out IP addresses immediately? We're going to say yes. Then click Finish. I don't know why it always does this. Highlight IPv4 and just click Refresh to get rid of that blue warning symbol. So here's our scope. I'll right-click it, go to Properties. There's some information. I can make any changes to any of this information but the subnet mask. I go to Address Pools. There's the range of IP addresses that I've assigned to the scope. I'm telling it not to pass out the first 12 because we're going to be using them. Here's our scope options. Basically, there's our gateway, there's our DNS server, and there is our domain name. So our DHCP server is up and running. We're going to come back here in a little bit And when we configure the WDS server, it's going to make some changes here. I'll go over that once we get to that point. It's going to minimize that or close that out. Now, we're going to create the server that is used to install operating systems on clients over the network. So what I need to do is put the DVD of the OS we want to install in this machine. So I'm going to go back to lab. I'm going to scroll to the bottom, and we can't do it while it's running, so I have to shut down the machine. So I'm going to click on the Start menu, click the power button, and shut down the machine. So once it's shut down, I'm going to go back to lab. Scroll to the bottom, find the WDS DHCP server, and hit the plus sign to add a DVD drive to this virtual machine. Now I can see there's one DVD drive. So the next thing we need to do is put the ISO for that DVD in the DVD drive. The ISO for Wds Server 2019 in that DVD drive. So I'm going to select it here, then insert it in that drive. I'm not real concerned if you understand this section because this is a weird interface and you're not going to see it in industry. So all we're doing is putting the DVD in that DVD drive. The DVD is for Wds Server 2019 installation. So I'm going to choose the disk, choose the drive, then press insert. I'm waiting for it to refresh. Now I can see that that DVD is in that virtual machine. I'm going to turn it on. And go to console. While it's booting, I'm going to pause the video. Okay, the machine is rebooted. I'm going to press Control Delete. Guys, if you don't see Control Delete, there should be 3 little dots here. I have to update Chrome. But click on that button and zoom in or zoom out until you see the buttons. And again, sign in as a domain admin. When we go through the wizard to install this service, it crashes. It's been that way since 2012. So if you're watching along on another video or looking at it in the book, the screenshots in the book or the video won't match what we're about to see because of the crash. It gets halfway through the wizard, then it starts the service. When it tries to start the service, it fails, and then the wizard crashes. So we have to manually start the service actually, and then we'll just manually add the missing components. So I'm going to click Tool, and now we're going to configure the WDS. I'm going to maximize the little utility and then expand servers. And you can see there's a little warning symbol on our server because it's not configured yet. So like all these utilities, you're going to highlight it, right click it, and now we're going to configure server. It's saying some prerequisites you should have before going in here is a domain controller. If we're doing a Active Directory integrated WDS server, and we are, we should have a DHCP server. We do. We just configured that. A DNS server, we configured that on the first video where we created our domain controller, and a NTFS file system, which we do. Click Next. It's going to be integrated in Active Directory as opposed to a standalone. If it's integrated in Active Directory, it adds a lot of features like automatically joining computers to the domain and stuff like that. So that's a nice feature. Click Next. It's going to create a folder called Remote Install under the C drive and share it. We're going to click Next. It's saying you shouldn't really put this on the same disk as your operating system, but since this is just a lab, we're going to do it. But in reality, I would have a whole separate disk because the images that we store on this shared folder are going to be quite large. So you want to keep them off the same disk as your operating system. Don't just create a new partition. It really needs to be a separate disk altogether. Click Yes. Now it's saying if you have a DHCP server on this machine, select these two items. What it's going to do is it's going to connect to the DHCP server and configure some stuff for us automatically. We want it to do that. This WDS server is going to be using the same ports as DHCP. So what we're going to do is say, don't listen on those ports because the DHCP server is on the same machine. Let the DHCP server use the ports. Then we're going to connect to the DHCP server and configure it so it understands what it needs to do to Pixie clients. Pixie clients are the machines that are booting to the network to install an operating system, as opposed to booting to their local hard disk. Click Next. Now we configure our WDS or Pixie server to not respond to any clients, respond to only machines that we've already joined to the domain, or respond to all machines, machines we know about and machines we don't know about, but then require the administrator to approve each machine. Guys, we can automate WDS so much that it would require no user interaction at all to install an operating system. So someone could boot up to the network, wipe out their hard disk, install a new operating system, install all the software that it needs, and reboot back, join to the domain. If someone comes in one day to their job and accidentally sticks their thumb drive in the computer and it doesn't boot to the hard disk, it tries to boot to the thumb drive, then skips over and boots to the network card, you could literally wipe out their machine. So a lot of companies require that you have some sort of fail-safe. So when someone is trying to install an OS, you need to approve it so you know that they're actually intending on installing an OS. They didn't just accidentally boot to the network card and it automatically installs an operating system. It doesn't really matter what we choose here because it's going to crash here in a minute. So I'm going to click Next. It's trying to stop. Oh, it didn't crash. I guess because of Ace IT, it's not crashing. We'll see. Starting Windows deployment server. No, it crashed. Okay. No big deal. We're just going to click Finish. and manually start the server. Highlight the server, all task, and start it. Give it a minute to start. So what the wizard would have done at this point is it would have started the service and then add images. Two types of images, a boot image and an installation image. So I'm going to go look at my DVD that we've inserted in this machine. I'm going to go to the C drive. No, I'm not. I'm going to go to the DVD drive. I'm going to go to the sources folder. And up in the top right hand corner, I'm going to filter out all files, but files with WIM. Put WIM there and hit enter. I'm going to try it again. Okay. When we install Windows Vista or later, which is Windows Vista, Windows 8, Windows 10, Windows Server 2012, Windows Server 2016, we're not actually doing an installation like we're used to. If you remember, if you install Windows XP, the first portion of the installation was like a command prompt portion. And so you boot it up to this little command prompt, and it then walks you through this command prompt wizard that allowed you to copy files to the hard disk. And then you rebooted your machine to those files on your hard disk, and at that point it was a graphic installation. Well, in Windows Vista and later, we don't really install like we did. What we do is we image our hard disk. So we have two images, a boot WIM and an install WIM. WIM stands for Windows Installation Media. The boot WIM is what's going to be passed to our client when it boots up off the network. So when our client boots up, it's going to connect to the network card. The network card will connect it to the Wds server, and the Wds server will pass it a boot WIM file. At that point, it will load that into memory and boot to that image in memory. That will be a 32-bit version of Windows, and it will automatically launch the installation program. It's a version of Windows called Windows PE, WinPE rather. WinPE stands for Windows Personal Edition. 32-bit version of the OS, it's graphical, and it allows us to do the installation. Once that is up and running in memory and the installation program is started, it will then read install WIM, again from the WDS, and then choose an operating system from install WIM to apply to the hard disk. So boot WIM will be used to boot the machine up off the network. The install WIM is the image file that we're going to apply to the hard disk when we install an operating system. You can see that this is going to be a lot smaller than this. So I'm going to close this out. I closed out the wrong thing. So I'm going to go to Tools, Windows Deployment Service. So if that wizard didn't crash, the next two things it would have done would be to add a boot image and to add an install image. So the first thing I'm going to do is highlight boot images and right click. I'm going to manually add the boot image as opposed to the wizard adding it for me. And it's telling you where to find the boot image. It's under the sources folder on the DVD. So I'm going to browse, choose the DVD, choose the sources folder, and grab boot WIM. Click open, click next. It read that boot WIM and determined that the image name was Microsoft Windows Setup x64. And the description is Microsoft Windows Setup x64. I'm just going to walk through the wizard, and it's going to add that boot image. While it's adding that boot image, I'm going to pause the video. Okay, it's done adding that image, so I'm going to choose Finish. Now, this is a custom version of WinPE that automatically launches the installation image. There could be scenarios where I want to create my own image to deploy to clients. So I could boot up off the network, and instead of installing an image, I want to grab an image off a hard disk and copy it to the WDS server. But this WinPE has been customized to automatically run the install program. In the past, what we would have to do is run a bunch of commands, and we could customize this WinPE not to run the installation program, but run the disk capture program. Now they have it automated for us. So I'm going to right click the start menu, and I'm going to automatically create a capture image. I'm going to click create a capture image, and I'm going to call it capture as opposed to setup. Okay, this next thing we're going to do is kind of funky. I want you to browse for a file that doesn't exist, then open it. So I'm going to click Browse. Go to the Documents folder and type Capture. I know there's no capture image there. I don't know, it's kind of silly. Even though it doesn't exist, open it. It'll work. Click Next. And again, I'm going to pause the video. This is going to take a few minutes. Don't close this window out, because once we've created our capture image, we want to add it to our WDS. So leave this window open. Okay, class, it added the image. Excuse me, it created the image. Now I'm going to check this box so it adds it to the WDS. So basically, it took the current boot WIM, opened it up, changed the start program. So now it's not going to start up the installation program, it's going to start up the capture program. So now we're going to add it to the WDS server. So I'm going to click Finish. It's going to now launch the Add Image Wizard. That's the WIM we're going to add, as opposed to the boot WIM. We're now going to add the capture WIM. Click Next. That's the name in the image. We've already set that up when we created the image. Next. In the past, guys, we would have to take the WinPE and manually customize it with a program called DISM, Disk Imaging Service Manager. It was a little command line utility, and you would have to run all these commands to create a customized image. Now, with the new WDS, since 2012, it'll create it for you. So now that image is added. So now when we boot up our clients with our operating systems to the network, it's going to be like a dual boot. We can do either a setup or a capture. If we do setup, it'll install a program. It'll install the operating system. If we do capture, it will go in and capture the hard disk if there's an operating system there ready to be captured. So these are our boot programs. So when our WDS server boots a client off the network, it's going to pass on one of these two programs, one of these two disk images that's going to be loaded into memory to boot that client up. Now, once it's booted, we need to give it an image to install. So we're going to highlight Install Images, right-click it, and add the install image. Again, if our wizard didn't crash, it would have done this for us. So it's going to ask you to create an image group. All that is do you remember when we installed this program, it asked us to create a folder called Remote Install? Underneath that, we have our boot images, which we just added. And our installation images, which we haven't added yet. So when we create an image group right here, all it's going to do is create a folder with that group name. So you can kind of group all of your operating systems together. If you want to put all your Windows 10 clients images together or all your server images together, you can do that. We're just going to leave the default name, image group 1. Click next. And again, it's going to ask us to grab the install WIM off the DVD. So I'm going to go to the DVD, go to the sources folder, and grab the install WIM. Now, an image file can contain multiple images. In this image file, install WIM, it has 4 images on it. Windows Server 2019 Server Core, meaning there's no graphic interface. Windows Server 2019 Server Standard with a graphic interface. Data Center Core, it's the data center, supports more memory, more CPUs, but no graphic interface. Then Data Center alone, more memory, more CPUs, but has a graphic interface. For this lab, we're just going to install one of them. I could actually add all 4, but I'm just to speed up the process, I'm only going to add 1. Click Next. Next. And now it's going to add that image. I'm going to pause the video while it's adding it. Okay, it added the image. And so now we have our WDS server fully up and running with images to install and boot images. We have 1 install image and 2 boot images. Now I'm going to go over to my DC. No, actually I'm going to go back to the WDS. I'm going to highlight my WDS server, right click it, and go to Properties. When the wizard crashed, there's some things we need to fix. So if I go to Pixie Response, remember we checked this box during the wizard, but when it crashed, it never saved that setting. So we want the administrator having to approve all clients every time a client tries to boot to the network. There's also a glitch in 2019 we didn't have in 2016 and 2012. The fix for that issue is go to the TFTP tab and unselect this box. If there's a variable window length, meaning the size of the packets for TFTP packets will change, it causes a problem. By unchecking this box, the size of a TFTP packet will always be the same size regardless. I'm not sure if they're going to do an update to fix it, but here's a temporary fix for right now. So all these things that we did in the wizard, we can make changes to right here. The other thing I want to show you before we go off this machine, again, let me just emphasize what I've changed. Under the Pixie Response, I checked that box because the wizard crashed and didn't save our settings. We have a TFTP issue. We unchecked that box so it'll actually pass out the boot WIM. Otherwise, it just fails in passing out the boot WIM. That's the fix. Because the DHCP server is on the same machine as the Pixie boot server, the Pixie boot server contacted the DHCP server and added this boot option. I'm going to go to server options. Then I can see it added this 060 Pixie client. This lets clients know that if you boot into the network, contact this machine to grab a boot WIM and an IP address. It also told the Pixie server not to listen on the DHCP ports because the DHCP server is on the same machine. If this is missing, what you can do is, and sometimes it is, go to the properties here, go to DHCP, unselect these boxes, hit apply, then reselect them. And that will contact the DHCP server again and create that entry. If your DHCP server is on a separate box, you need to manually go add that Pixie client entry, and you then have to add 2 more entries identifying the boot server and the boot file. Right now, if there is no boot server and boot file option, it assumes to go to the DHCP server to get that information, which is, if they're on the same box, that's the way it needs to be done. It makes it a lot easier if you put the Wds server and the DHCP on the same box, but sometimes you might not be able to do that. At that point, you have a little more work to do. So I'm going to go to the DC DNS server. I'm going to sign in as a domain admin. We're going to go to Tools, Active Directory Users and Computers. Active Directory Users and Computers. I'm not sure why it's, oh, there it is. Just was slow. Okay, every time a computer gets joined to the domain, just like your user account, it creates a computer account. And they're automatically stored in here. If I right click one of the computer accounts that I currently have, you might not have these, but don't worry if you don't. I'm going to go to Properties. You see how I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 tabs? Most of the tabs are hidden from me because they don't want you to mess with them. So if I go to View, then click on Advanced Features, that shows all tabs. So I'm going to go back to Computer Container and go back to a computer object, then right click and go to Properties. You can see I have a lot more tabs. If I go to the Security tab, I can see right now that domain admins have all these rights. Here's the problem. If you deploy an image from the Wds server as the domain admin, change password is set to deny, and reset password is set to deny as well. They don't want you to deploy images from the Wds server as the domain admin. They make special steps to prevent that from happening, because if you do, someone might be able to do something that you don't want them to do. So what you really should do is create another user account to deploy images. And when you do deploy an image with someone other than domain admin, those two attributes aren't set. Meaning, just like a user account, a computer account has a password. That password is maintained by Active Directory. but the domain admin won't be able to change the password or reset the password if it's deployed with WDS. So we need to really deploy it with another user account. So what we're going to do is press cancel and create another. Let's hide everything back up. I'm going to unselect advanced features. And let's create a new user account to deploy images with. So I'm going to right click and go to properties. No, I'm not. I'm going to right click and go to new user. I'm going to call this user join domain. And then the user account, the actual login name will be join domain, no spaces, one word. Click next. I'm not going to have the user change his password for the first login. Now I'm using our standard password for this user account password. I'm unselecting user must change password at next login. Click next and finish. So from this point on, we're going to deploy images to our clients using this account as opposed to our domain admin account. So when we sign into our WDS, we'll sign in with this user account, not with the domain admin account. And then it eliminates all kind of issues. If you go on the forums, a lot of people are saying that the computers don't join the domain once you deploy them. Well, that's because they're trying to deploy them as the domain admin. And I'm just kind of shocked that no one in the forums has ever realized that that's what you need to do. Don't deploy images as the domain admin. You're eventually going to get yourself in trouble. That's why we created this account. Now the next thing we need to do is we need to allow the joint domain to create computer accounts in this folder. So we're going to right click the computer container and say delegate control. I'm going to add user. I'm going to type join domain, one word, no spaces. I'm going to create a custom task. I'm going to delegate control of this folder and everything in it. And I'm going to give them full control. So the joint domain account will have full control over the computer container. So when I deploy a operating system to a client, that joint domain account will be able to create the computer account for that client, reset the password, do everything that it needs, no issues. By default, now I'm going to close this. By default, a normal user account, and remember, join domain is nothing special. It's not a domain admin. It's just an unprivileged user account. If someone hacks that account, they won't have a lot of things they can do. So what we're going to do is go to Tools and go to Group Policy Management. By default, a normal user account can add 10 computers to the domain. Well, we need this account to be able to do more than just 10 because that's its sole function is to add computer accounts to the domain. So what we're going to do is we're going to create a group policy. Instead of going to every machine on our network and making a change, we can create a group policy and push it out to all the computers on our network. So I'm going to right click Group Policy Objects and say New. I'm going to say Join Domain Settings. I'm going to click OK. So we created a new group policy and now we're going to edit it. So I'm going to right click it, highlight it, then right click it. and click Edit. We're going to get a lot more in depth in group policies in our third class. Okay, so we're going to expand computer configuration. We're going to expand policies. We're going to expand Windows settings. We're going to expand security settings. We're going to expand local policies. And we're going to expand user rights assignment. Last time I checked, there's over 4,000 settings in this policy. You're not going to know them right away. You might have to hunt and peck to find the thing that you need, or do a Google search and find out where things are. It's just going to take some experience with the policy. I don't recommend trying to sit down and memorize everything because it's not going to happen. So what we're going to do is we're going to allow join domain to have unlimited joins to the domain, meaning the join domain user account will be able to add as many clients to the domain without issue as he likes. So we're going to highlight the add workstation to domain setting, double click it, and we're going to define this policy. Then we're going to add that user account, click add, then click browse, and type join domain. Then click OK. So this account will be able to add workstations to the domain without issue. For security reasons, we don't want this account to be able to sign into any machine other than the WDS. So what I can do is deny this account to log in locally to any machine but the WDS. So I'm going to go find the policy that says deny log on locally. Double click it. Again, define the policy. Add that user account, then browse for the user account. Type join domain, no spaces. Don't worry about clicking check name. Have some faith in yourself that you've typed it right. If you click OK and you haven't, it'll warn you. Click OK and click OK. So we have two settings in this policy. First, allow join domain unlimited joins to the network. As many computer accounts as he wants to add to the network, he can. By default, the location they'll be added to is the computer container, which we already given full rights of to join domain. The next thing we did was we denied join domain from logging in locally. So if someone sits down at a workstation and tries to sign in with join domain, they're not going to be allowed. The only purpose of this account is to deploy images, and that's it. You don't want to allow some user to log in and do anything else with the network. And incidentally, it doesn't have a lot of authority. The only control that it has is access to that computer container. So I'm going to close this policy. Now we created this policy. I want to link it to our domain. So any object in our domain will read this policy. So I'm going to highlight our domain and link an existing GPO and choose Join Domain Settings. So now I want to go back to the policy. Who's going to get this policy? Authenticated users. The Authenticated Users group is a dynamic group, meaning any user account or any computer account that has logged in successfully will be dynamically added to this group. And when they log off, they'll be dynamically removed from this group. So essentially, if you can sign in, you'll be a member of this group. The policy says deny log on locally. We don't want that to be applied to the WDS because we want the join domain user account to be able to sign in on the WDS server. So what we're going to do is, this is Authenticated Users. We'll get this policy and apply it. So we're going to go to Status. No, we're not. We're going to go to Settings. Maybe not. Delegation. That's where we want to go. So we're going to go to Delegation. Then we're going to click on Advanced. We're going to add an account. WDS hyphen DHCP $. When you refer to computer accounts in a domain, you put the $sign after it. If you refer to a computer account that's not part of the domain, you don't put the $sign. The next thing we need to do is go to Object Type, and the object is a computer account, not a user account. So we need to make sure we select computer. So it's going to be a computer object called WDS DHCP $, with a hyphen in it. Click OK. So we've added the account. We gave this account permission. What we want to do is scroll down and apply this policy. We're going to say deny. Because remember, when the WDS boots up, it's going to be automatically added to the Authenticated Users group, which means that it will read and apply the policy called Join Domain Settings, which prevents Join Domain from logging in locally. We don't want that to happen. So we don't want this machine to apply that policy. We want all the other computers in our network to apply that policy, but this machine, because this machine, Join Domain, needs to log in locally. So I'm going to click OK. And it's saying, Join Domain will be granted rights to apply the policy as an authenticated user. But because we chose deny, it's going to overwrite that. So if they're granted that right in any other group, it's not going to matter because deny takes precedent over allow. So if you're a member of multiple groups, the group that has the deny permission will overwrite any other group. Click yes. And go back to scope. So basically, we customized our join user account to have unlimited joins, and we prevented that user account from signing into any machine but the WDS. Now, one last thing we need to do before we finish this video. I would like to make the Join Domain user account a local administrator account on the WDS. Not a domain admin, just a local administrator account on the WDS. So I'm going to right click the start menu and go to computer management. This computer has two types of accounts: domain accounts and local accounts. So if you're a member of a local account, you can sign in. If you're a member of a domain account, you can sign in. We don't want to give Join Domain admin rights. That would be overkill. We just want to give Join Domain full control over this machine that is used to deploy images. So I'm going to expand local users and groups, expand groups. Then I'm going to go to the administrators group. And I'm going to add Join Domain, one word, no spaces. Click OK. As a local admin. And I'll show you why. When we walked through the wizard and it created that remote install folder, I'm going to right click and go to properties, and under security, who has the ability to have full control over this folder? The local administrator's account. By adding Join Domain to the administrator account, not only can join domain add software and stuff that he needs to do to deploy images, he'll be able to write images or to read images that are stored in this remote install folder. Okay, that's pretty much the full setup for WDS. Now in class, I would have you deploy an image to make sure everything works right. But on this ACIT, there's all kind of problems that's going to prevent you from deploying an image. So I'm not going to have you deploy an image. All I want you to do is set up the server to deploy images. So if we were to deploy an image, I would sign out as a domain admin. And then sign in other user, join domain, using our standard password. Since we're not signing in as the admin account, we don't have to say Contoso. I know this is a domain account that is a member of a local administrators group. So we nested a domain account into a local administrators group. So the only authority join domain has on this network is on this server and the computer container on our domain controllers. If someone try to sit down at a Windows 10 box and log in as join domain, it's going to prevent them from logging in. So when a client boots up off of the network, this user account would have to go Tools, Windows Deployment Services, expand the servers, and because we did the administrator must approve before a computer can boot to the network, it would have to go to pending devices, and it would see a request here for a pending device, meaning someone booted their computer to the network and it said, contact your administrator, and there's an ID number there. You would take that ID number, find it in this list, right-click it, and you would have to, and I can't show you because I don't have an image here, you would right-click it and say, name and approve. And I'll go into why we do name and approve later. And you walk through this little wizard to give it a name and to approve it and allow it to start the installation. Okay, guys, our next lab, excuse me, is going to be automating the installation. Because normally when you do an installation, it's going to ask you for several things. Partition the hard disk, what software you want to install, do you want to give it your firstborn baby, do you want to set the Wi-Fi up, where are you located, things like that. So what we're going to do is we're going to create an answer file that supplies all that information to the installation. So when you deploy an image, you essentially don't have to touch it other than that name and approve part. That's called light touch. If we didn't do that name and approve, but did answer files, that would be called zero touch. And you could kind of get yourself in trouble because you could deploy an image not knowingly, and that might not be something you want to do. If someone deploys an image without knowing that they did it and they delete all the data off the hard disk, your name's going to be mud. They're going to blame you regardless of whatever they did wrong. So be careful with that. So what we're doing next is light touch. We already did the name and approve part. The next portion is supply all the answers that are required during an installation. Okay, that's it for this video, and I will talk to you later. Thank you.